Now, have you ever had a really, really good idea that in hindsight turns out to be not so good after all? Instead of great joy and excitement, it ends up in pain and confusion, like the idea that I don't have to walk around that puddle, I could jump it. Yeah? Now, here's a video that many of you have seen, but here's 14 guys with a really good idea. That thing's going to balance. Who could have foresaw that? Like, really? How could that possibly go wrong? Now, that's exactly how some of us may well feel about Jesus' most famous words. Lots of people around the world don't know much about Jesus, don't know what he said, but they know 3 words that he said, and those words are, love your enemies. Good idea, but can you see how that might go wrong? We might feel that way. And so today we want to look at Jesus' words. We've been working our way through the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. Also, his words appear in Luke chapter 6. And I should explain, why is there a little bit of difference between Matthew and Luke? Well, the way I understand it is Jesus preached probably 5 or 6 times a day. And for days, for a long period of time. And so I don't see the Sermon on the Mount as one sermon that he preached from start to finish, but it's the summary of hundreds of sermons. Same with Luke. And so as you summarize it, there's going to be little differences. But Dean's going to come now and read for us from Matthew chapter 5 and Luke chapter 6.
Matthew 5. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And in Luke. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. Someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful.
Jesus said, love your enemies. Sometimes when we think of these verses, we think of, like, who are our enemies? Is it like North Korea or ISIS? And we make it on a big scale, and it applies there. But first and foremost, Jesus' application is on a personal level. And so this morning, as I'm working through this passage, I want you to identify in your mind, who is your enemy? Who are your enemies? You see, very few of us make it through life without collecting a group of people who won't be that sad to hear that we've died. We have enemies, people who don't like us and we don't necessarily like them. We wouldn't mind to see us fail. We wouldn't mind to see them fail either. By the way, did you know that some people are like slinkies? No real purpose in life, but bring a smile to your face when you push them down the stairs. Now, those are the people that I'm talking about in your life, the slinkies, right? Those who you might all not be that sad about them going down the stairs. And maybe a relationship, a friendship that has deteriorated over the last few months. And you no longer see this person as a friend. Maybe if you're the owner of a business, it's the owner down the street who's stealing your customers. Or if you're a salesperson, it might be the other salespeople that you're competing with for sales and bonuses. Or it's your supervisor who's unfair to you. Or if you're the boss, maybe it's some of your employees or the union organizer. Or it's a teacher who just doesn't cut you any slack. Or a dad who destroyed your self-esteem. A girlfriend or boyfriend who broke your heart and left you. A neighbor who plays loud music. Whose dog poops on your yard all the time. Now, can you picture your enemy? To go through this sermon, I want you to think of someone. Who's your enemy? Okay, you got him or her? You know, it might be the person who is sitting across the breakfast table from you this morning. That might be your enemy. Now, what are we supposed to do with this person? Yeah, you got this person in your mind? What are you supposed to do with this person? Jesus says, instead of pushing them down the stairs and smiling, he says, love your enemy. Now, what precisely does that mean? We could go into a big word study here, but let me give you the short version. Jesus is calling us to an active feeling of goodwill towards that person, which means that no matter what that person does or says to us, we desire nothing but their highest good. We will deliberately and on purpose go out of our way to be good and kind to this person. That is what Jesus is calling us to do, how he's calling us to respond to our enemy, to the person that we've pictured in our mind. Now let me dig a little deeper into what Jesus is teaching us here. Dealing with our enemies. You know, it's one of those ideas that sounds good, but you can see how this is going to come back and bite you, right? It raises questions in our minds. When you're dealing with your enemy, what's the normal first question that comes to your mind? Isn't it, how can I fight my enemy and win? Haven't you asked yourself that? Maybe even this last week. How do I fight my enemy and win? The normal answer is what? Well, we fight better and harder and with better weapons. Maybe we use the same weapons, but use them more skillfully. And we go at it hard. So if he steals my customers, what's the normal response? Steal some of his customers. If he calls me names, call him bad names as well. What do we do if he gossips about us? Stretching the truth, telling people lies about us that make us look bad. What if he threatens you, or lies, or cheats, or hits you? We respond in kind because doesn't the Bible say an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a customer for a customer, a lie for a lie, a name for a name? We know how to fight and win, and when the opponent is too big and too strong for us, we also know how to run and hide and duck for cover. I want you to see that in this passage, Jesus turns this whole thing upside down. He begins by redefining what it means to win. In fighting our enemy, Jesus says winning looks like this. But love your enemies, do good to them, and lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because he is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. In fighting our enemies, Jesus says winning means becoming like Christ. Jesus' exact words are, you will be children of the Most High. Jesus says that in dealing with our enemy, winning is an eternal thing. It involves a great reward from the Most High God. Winning involves becoming like Jesus, like God, who is kind and grateful, or kind and to the ungrateful and the wicked. It involves becoming merciful, just as God is merciful. Jesus is not saying that we become children of God by loving our enemies, but rather we love our enemies because that's who we've become. We become children of the Most High. That's how the children respond. Jesus points us to take an eternal perspective on this winning in our battle. And when it comes to fighting our enemies, winning means we become like Jesus Christ. This moves us to the next step. If Jesus changes what it means to win, then it has huge ramifications on the weapons that we use in this conflict. And here's Jesus' lesson for us. Listen carefully to this one. We are to use the very opposite weapon than the one that's being used against us. We use the opposite weapon than the one that's being used against us. Jesus says, don't use the weapons of this world, the ones that we would normally use, but use eternal weapons that will win eternal victories. Use the opposite weapon than the one that's being used against you. Look again at Luke chapter 6. But to you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, do not withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Do you see the weapons that Jesus wants you to use? If someone hates you, what's the weapon you're to use in response? To love. Doing good. Loving the person. If someone curses you, curses means they say all kinds of bad things about you. They gossip about you. If someone curses you, what's the weapon? To bless them. You say all kinds of good things about them. If someone treats you badly, what's your weapon? You pray for them. And not the prayer that says, God, rain down fire on them and burn them to a crisp. No, prayers of blessing. God, may you prosper them. May you grant them peace and health and strength. When someone punches you in the face, what's your weapon? To turn the other cheek. If someone steals your coat, what's your weapon? You give them your shirt as well. What's your weapon if someone's lying about you? Is rounding up all kinds of people against you, is telling all kinds of evil things about you. What's your weapon when someone's cheating you? What if your enemy has given up on you, just kind of ignores you, treats you with disdain? What's your weapon? Your weapon is to give the person a new beginning, a second chance. How are you doing in all of this? Need a minute to breathe? It's hard, isn't it? Now, let me give you something else really practical to think about. If Jesus changes the definition of what it means to win, and secondly, he changes or asks us to use a different kind of weapon than what we would normally use, then it raises a third question, and the third question is who is our real enemy in all of this? The real enemy is not the person in front of you, the person who's hurting us. is the one who wants to destroy your souls, the powers of this world. I'm not fighting you. I'm fighting the one who likes to get between us and get us to aim our words and our actions at each other. You see, Satan's purpose is to kill, steal, and destroy. And guess what? He wants my help to do that to you. He wants me to believe that you are my enemy, that we will use our weapons on each other, ultimately until we do his work by destroying each other. That's why the weapons of this world don't really work in this fight, because I can't aim the weapons at my true enemy. I can aim them at you and destroy you, and you can do the same to me. But the weapons that Jesus is talking about, the weapons of loving and blessing and giving and forgiving, these are the weapons that our true enemy cannot stand up against. Now, I want to pull us up short here for a little bit. I asked you to think about someone when we got started, your enemy. And so let me ask, whose weapons have you been using against this enemy? Jesus' weapons or the weapons of this world? And whose side have you been playing for? What is the victory that you've been going after? A victory where your coworker, your neighbor, the person across the table from you is destroyed and cut down or put down in position? Or have you been fighting to prove that you're a child of the Most High? Who have we seen to be our true enemy? The guy at work, or the evil one who wants to destroy your soul? Now, you might come and say, well, Russ, in this talk here, this sounds to make a lot of sense. Yeah, this is a good idea. But if I put it into practice, it's like those 14 guys on the log. I'm going to get hurt. Like, how do we put Jesus' words into practice and not end up destroyed? How does this work? How am I going to do this? I don't understand. How is this possible? How is it possible to love your enemy? Well, Jesus adds two things here that'll help. First of all, we need to recognize that in this, God is our source. We cannot do this unless God is our source. This becomes clear when we understand what he is saying about money in this passage. Now, most of the people that he was talking to were very, very poor. They didn't have money. They didn't have possessions. But he says to them, if anyone steals from you, give him more. Give to anyone who asks for you. If somebody asks, give to him. If you've lent things out, don't demand them back. He even says to give to your enemy. Jesus says, if you lend to those and expect to be repaid, how are you different? How is that any credit to you? How are you different than the sinners? The sinners do that. Lend to your enemies without expecting them to give you anything back. Now, economically in our lives, how's that going to work? How's it going to work? That's kind of screwed up, isn't it? Well, here's the deal. If I'm the source, or we're talking money now, if I'm the source in my life, basically I have about 5 options to get money. I can earn it, I can win it, I can inherit it, I can borrow it, I can steal it. You might come up with more ways to get money than that. But if I've got to come up with the ways, then I'm the source. And Jesus' plan here just doesn't work, because the output is way greater than the input. and I end up with nothing. But God, if God is our source, this can work. And it's the same not just with money, but with the other things. If I'm the source of love in my life, I'm going to love those who love me and hate my enemies. I'm going to lend to the people that I know are going to pay me back. I'm going to have people over for dinner who will have me over. If I'm the source, I'm going to do exactly what Jesus says the sinners do. Because they don't look to God as their source. I will only do what the Pharisees are doing. If I'm the source, I don't have enough money and love, forgiveness to go around to cover my enemies. I only have enough for the people who are close to me. So first of all, to make this thing work, God needs to be our source. Secondly, loving our enemy is not something we try to do, but rather it's a result of who we become. Jesus' whole point in the Sermon on the Mount is that we need to be transformed, that we need to be different, we need to change. But once we are transformed, then these things start to flow from us naturally. I want to point out one more thing before we finish. Back at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, before Jesus starts talking about all of this, he says this. This is Matthew 5, verse 20. But I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes or the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, these words must have been a shock for people of Jesus' day. Because the scribes and Pharisees, or the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they had a reputation of being righteous. And their way of righteousness was, here's all these rules. And these guys were really, really good at keeping these rules. And so society looked at them and said, whoa, these are righteous dudes. And Jesus turns around and says, unless your righteousness surpasses what they're doing, you're not going to make it. Now, some people will have understood, okay, they've got these rules, and yeah, they fill them, like 99% of the time, but once in a while they screw up. And if we can do this perfectly, because you notice the last part of the verse at one point says, be perfect as your Father is perfect. Some people will have understood that if we do this perfectly, we'll be better than the scribes and Pharisees, and we're good to go. But that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about, in all of this Sermon on the Mount stuff, he's talking about heart transformation. You see, the Pharisees' aim was to keep this list, rather than to be transformed so that they naturally are the kind of people who live this way. And Jesus isn't going for us to perfectly keep this list. What he's going for is that we be transformed, that our very natures change, so that these are the kind of things that we do by nature. Things like loving our enemies are things that's kind of the normal way that we will respond because we've been changed. Jesus knew what the human heart was like. And therefore he concludes by contrasting the ordinary way that human beings react. Lending to those who will pay back. Loving those who are our friends. He compares that to the kind of love that can flow from us when we are truly transformed. Where we love our enemies. We lend, we help. We genuinely help our enemies. As we conclude, 5 real quick things. First of all, in dealing with your enemy, that person that I had you think about, that person you'd kind of smile about as they're tumbling down the stair, that person, do you want to win against that person? And what does win mean for you? Winning means, in Jesus' words, that you become more and more like him. And I'm assuming that you're answering yes to that. And that's what you want. You want to become like Christ. You want him to use this conflict in your life to make you more like Christ. So then, secondly, what is the weapon that's being used against you? What are they doing against you? What's the weapon that's being used to try to destroy you? Can you identify it? Do you know exactly what people are doing to you? Okay, once you've identified it, then commit yourself to use the very opposite weapon. Okay, if the person is saying all kinds of bad things about you, isn't it natural for us to say all kinds of bad things about them? Identify the weapon. They're saying all kinds of bad things about me. They're cursing me. They're telling the boss of how I'm a screw-up. Okay? Choose the opposite weapon, which means you're going to say all kinds of nice things about this person. You're going to bless them. You're going to ask God to bless them. The fourth step is maybe, it's necessary. It's just basically being honest with God about all of this. Say something like this: God, I don't want to love this guy or this lady. I want to use the same weapons against them that they're using against me. They're destroying me, and I want to destroy them. I want to do unto them before they do unto me. I want to smile as they're the ones who are falling down the stairs. But I'm asking you to change my heart, to transform me. I can't do this. To be honest with you, God, I don't even want to do this. But change my heart, transform me, be my source. Cause your love to flow toward my enemy through me. Bless him. And maybe even use me to be the person who blesses him. And then the fifth step is just to simply go out and live the commitment that you've made to love your enemy. Jesus tells us, love your enemies.